In the icy stretches of the Arctic, where the snow seems endless and the cold bites at everything, a polar bear named Koda struggled to survive. Alone and weak, Koda wandered across the frozen landscape, searching for food, but the world around him seemed unkind. His once mighty body, a symbol of strength, now showed signs of wear. His fur was matted and dull, and his eyes had lost their usual spark. The climate around him was changing, the ice was melting, and food was becoming scarce. Koda's situation was growing desperate. Despite his struggles, Koda fought to stay alive, relying on the very instincts that had kept him alive for years. But every day felt harder than the last. The days seemed colder, the winds stronger, and Koda was growing weaker. In the wild, survival was a constant challenge, but now the harshness of the environment seemed more unforgiving than ever. Then, a team of dedicated rescuers, led by an experienced wildlife conservationist named Emma, set out on a mission. They had heard about Koda's condition, and they knew that time was running out for him. The team had seen many animals in distress before, but Koda's case was different. They knew that this would be one of the most difficult rescues they had ever attempted. They couldn't afford to fail. The moment Koda's weak form came into view, it was clear to Emma and her team that they had to act quickly. Koda was no longer just a polar bear. He had become a symbol of the fragile balance between nature and climate. The struggle to save him wasn't just about his survival. It was a fight for the future of an entire species, and a reminder of the urgent need to protect the environment that all animals, including polar bears, depend on. Emma and her team knew that saving Koda meant more than just rescuing one animal. It was a chance to show the world the power of compassion and the importance of protecting wildlife. This is the story of Koda's miraculous rescue and the incredible transformation that followed. It is a story of hope, of the bond between humans and animals, and of the strength that comes from the will to survive. Koda's world was slowly crumbling around him. The wind howled fiercely through the icy plains, cutting through his fur like sharp knives. The Arctic was no longer the welcoming haven it once was. It had become a place of fear and survival. For days, Koda had not eaten, his body growing weaker with each passing hour. The weight of hunger and exhaustion settled heavily on his shoulders as he moved across the ice, his paws dragging through the snow. His usual instincts, the very ones that had guided him through years of survival in this harsh environment, seemed to betray him now. The ice he once navigated with ease was shifting and breaking apart, leaving him stranded in places where he could no longer find solid ground. The scent of food, once a familiar comfort, was nowhere to be found. The polar bear's natural food sources were dwindling due to the melting ice, and Koda, alone and weakened, couldn't keep up. It was an overwhelming sense of isolation that began to take over Koda. The wild was vast, but it was no longer a place of safety. With every step, he felt the weight of hopelessness creeping in. There was no mother to guide him, no fellow bear to keep him company. His once strong body had become frail. His breathing was shallow, his steps slower. The urgency of the situation hit him like a wave, but he had no strength to push back. Koda's fur had become matted and thin, not from age, but from the continuous struggle. His eyes, once sharp and alert, had dulled from the lack of energy. He could no longer see the world with the same vigor he once had. It felt like everything around him was slipping away. The cold was unbearable, and he could feel it creeping deeper into his bones. His body was failing him, and with each moment, the fear of not surviving grew stronger. The ice beneath his paws was no longer a trusted companion. It was treacherous, unstable, ready to break under his weight. As days turned into nights and nights, blurred into an endless cycle of pain and hunger, Koda's situation became increasingly desperate. Every step he took was a fight against nature, against the very environment that had once been his home. The more he struggled, the harder it became to continue. His once mighty claws, perfect for hunting and climbing, had dulled from lack of use. He was no longer the proud polar bear he once was. He was a shadow of himself, barely holding on. But there was a faint flicker of hope. Unknown to Koda, a small group of dedicated rescuers was on their way. They had been tracking the polar bear's movements for days, knowing that the longer they waited, the harder it would be to reach him. They had received reports about his condition of a polar bear, wandering the ice alone, weak and injured. The team had seen animals in distress before, but something about Koda's situation stood out. His struggle was a cry for help that no one could ignore. As Emma, the wildlife conservationist, and her team made their way across the frozen landscape. They were met with harsh winds and blinding snow. They could feel the urgency in their every step. Time was running out, and the challenges of reaching Koda were immense. The terrain was unpredictable patches of ice that could break at any moment, high winds that made it difficult to navigate, and the cold biting at their skin and seeping into their bones. They knew that once they found Koda, they wouldn't have much time. A rescue like this wasn't just about reaching the animal, it was about being prepared for the worst. The team had been trained for such situations, but nothing could prepare them for the sight they would find when they finally laid eyes on Koda. When Emma first spotted him, her heart sank. There he was, a once majestic polar bear, now lying on the ice, barely able to lift his head. His breathing was labored, and his fur, once thick and white as snow, was now thin and dirty. Koda's eyes were tired, filled with a quiet sadness that spoke volumes about the pain he had endured. The team could see that he was in critical condition, weak from starvation, dehydrated, and on the verge of collapse. The emotional weight of the situation was immediate and overwhelming. Emma could feel the urgency in her chest, the pressure of knowing that Koda's survival depended on their actions. They had to act quickly. There was no time to waste. The team worked as fast as they could, but each movement felt like a race against time. They set up a perimeter around Koda, cautiously approaching him, trying to keep the situation calm and controlled. Koda was too weak to resist, but his fear was palpable. His body trembled as the team gently moved toward him, each of them fully aware that one wrong move could push him further into distress. Koda's fear was not just of the humans approaching him, it was the fear of the unknown. What would happen to him now? Would they help him, or was this just another fight he would lose? His body was failing him, and yet, a part of him still clung to life, hoping for a miracle. Emma could see that. She could see the flicker of life in his eyes, and she knew that they had to do everything in their power to make sure Koda's fight wasn't over yet. The team carefully wrapped Koda in blankets and prepared to transport him to safety. The feeling of relief was palpable, but it was not enough to calm the fear that lingered in their hearts. They knew that Koda's survival was only the first step. There was still so much to be done. The fight was not over. The struggle had not ended. It had only just begun. Emma and her team had rescued Koda from the brink of death, but they knew that the real challenge was ahead. They had to get Koda to safety, to care for him, and to give him the chance to heal. It was a race against time, but they were determined to make sure Koda's fight for survival was not in vain. Koda's journey was far from over, but as he lay in the safe hands of the rescue team, there was a glimmer of hope. The struggle, though far from over, had taken a new direction, a direction toward life, toward healing, and toward the possibility of a second chance. As Koda was carefully loaded into the rescue vehicle, his body shivering uncontrollably from exhaustion, there was a brief moment of silence. Emma sat beside him, watching as the team secured him for the journey. His eyes, still dull from his ordeal, flickered with a hint of confusion, yet something in them also seemed to soften a glimmer of relief. For the first time in what felt like ages, Koda wasn't alone. He wasn't fighting to survive by himself. He was in the hands of those who cared, and that small but powerful realization was enough to spark something inside him. The ride to the rescue center was long. the sound of the vehicle's engine humming as they moved through the snow-covered land. But during that journey, a change began to happen within Koda. It wasn't something immediate or dramatic. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. He began to relax, just a little. His breathing, once shallow and labored, became deeper, more stable. His fur, though still thin and damaged, seemed to hold a little more warmth against the cold. The constant tension in his body eased, and for the first time in a long while, Koda felt a sense of safety. He wasn't fighting for his life anymore. He was being cared for, and it felt different. It was during the journey that Emma noticed a small shift in him. Koda was still weak, still fragile, but there was something in his gaze, a quiet trust forming. It wasn't a loud, obvious transformation, but it was enough for Emma to recognize. She knew this was the turning point. They had to be careful, patient, and gentle. This wasn't just about saving him physically. It was about giving him the emotional space to heal as well. The rescue team worked tirelessly once they reached the center, quickly setting up the medical equipment needed to assess Koda's condition. Emma and her team had seen many animals coming critical, but Koda's case was special. He wasn't just a polar bear. They could feel that this was a life that had been teetering on the edge, a life that deserved a second chance. But it wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, each one demanding a combination of patience, skill, and unwavering commitment. But now, something had shifted. The hope that had seemed so distant now felt tangible. The team began to hydrate Koda and offer him the first small amounts of food he had had in days. Emma watched closely. The first few bites were tentative, unsure. Koda sniffed the food, but hesitated, his body still overwhelmed by weakness. But then, something changed again. He took a bite, then another. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. Enough to show Emma that the spark of survival, of will, had not gone out. Koda was beginning to fight back. It wasn't just a physical recovery, it was a mental shift as well. In those first hesitant moments, Koda seemed to make a decision. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He wanted to live. He wanted to heal. The medical team worked around the clock, providing Koda with the necessary care, nourishment, medication, and physical therapy. But just as important, they gave him space to rebuild his trust. They never rushed him. They let him take things at his own pace. Koda had to learn, slowly but surely, that he could feel safe again. And as the days passed, something miraculous happened. Koda started to respond to the love and care he was receiving. He allowed his caregivers to come closer, his eyes no longer filled with fear, but with curiosity. His body, once frail and weak, began to regain some of its strength. His fur, though still thin, began to regain its luster, and the shadows of exhaustion started to lift from his face. Every day, Emma noticed something new, a small movement, a glimmer of energy. Koda was becoming more and more the bear he once was, and that transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. One evening, after a particularly successful therapy session, Emma sat by his side, her hand resting gently on his massive shoulder. She could feel the warmth returning to his body, the tension slowly fading away. Koda wasn't just recovering physically, he was reconnecting with his spirit. Emma knew that the real turning point had come when Koda made the choice to trust again. It was a quiet decision, one that didn't make headlines or dramatic waves. But it was the most powerful moment of all. This was no longer just about survival. This was about giving Koda a future, a life worth living. As he began to recover, Koda also began to show a part of himself that had been hidden for so long, a strength that went beyond the physical. There was something in his eyes now, determination, a flicker of hope that wasn't there before. It was in these moments, as Koda lay peacefully resting with a full belly and a heart that seemed to beat a little stronger, that Emma realized just how far they had come. The emotional bond between them had grown, and it was clear that Koda was no longer just an animal in need of help. He was family now. The road ahead would still be long, but Emma was certain of one thing: Koda was ready to fight. He was ready to thrive. And that small but powerful moment, when Koda decided he wasn't just surviving anymore, marked the beginning of a new chapter for him. Koda's journey, though far from over, had turned a corner. And for the first time, the future looked bright. Koda's recovery had been a long and challenging journey, but now, standing on the edge of a new chapter in his life, the team faced their most crucial moment. It wasn't just about restoring Koda's physical strength anymore. This was about testing his resilience and showing the world that the will to survive could conquer even the harshest of circumstances. The team had prepared for the moment when Koda would need to make his final push toward full recovery. Every small victory along the way had been a testament to his strength. But this moment was different. This was the moment when Koda would need to prove that he could return to the wild, to his true home, where he had once thrived. Emma stood at the edge of the enclosure, watching Koda with a mixture of hope and nervous anticipation. His eyes had changed. They were brighter now, filled with a sense of purpose and determination that had been absent when they first found him. The final step in Koda's transformation was near. He had to leave the safety of the sanctuary, the place where he had healed, and step back into the wilderness. But before that, he needed to take the ultimate test, a physical exam. His recovery had been remarkable, but it was time for Emma and the team to ensure that Koda could survive on his own again. The team watched as Koda paced back and forth inside the enclosure, his movements stronger and more confident than before. He was ready. But as Emma and the team opened the gate to the large open space of the wilderness area, a sense of unease settled over her. Was he really ready? Could he survive in the wild again, after everything he had been through? Koda paused at the gate, his body tense. For a moment, it seemed as though he was hesitating. He had been safe here, surrounded by people who had cared for him, fed him, and nursed him back to health. The wild was uncertain. It was full of dangers, predators, and a world that had turned cruel. Would he be able to face it again? But then, Koda did something unexpected. He took a single step forward, then another, and another. His body moved with purpose, his paws pushing against the earth beneath him. The hesitation faded as he grew more confident, moving toward the open expanse, away from the safety he had come to know. Emma watched, her breath catching in her throat. This was it. This was the moment where everything Koda had been through, every battle, every tear, every ounce of energy came down to this single act. And then, as Koda reached the edge of the wild, something incredible happened. The wind picked up, ruffling his fur, and for the first time in weeks, Koda lifted his head high. He breathed deeply, as if inhaling the very essence of the land he had once called home. There was a rawness in his movements now, a deep connection to the world around him. This was not just a polar bear returning to the wild. This was a polar bear reclaiming his place in the world. Emma's heart raced as she watched Koda take a few more steps into the wilderness. He paused for a moment, looking back over his shoulder. Emma stood at the edge of the sanctuary, watching him, her heart swelling with pride. There was no fear in his gaze anymore, only confidence. It was a moment of pure triumph, the culmination of months of hard work, struggle, and sacrifice. Koda was no longer a weak, fragile animal on the brink of death. He was a survivor, a fighter, and now he was ready to face the world on his own terms. Koda's journey had come full circle. The fight that had once seemed impossible, his fight for survival, for a second chance, had led him here, to this moment of redemption. He was standing tall, the mighty polar bear he was meant to be, no longer bound by the constraints of fear or weakness. And as Emma watched Koda disappear into the vast expanse of the Arctic wilderness, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She knew that Koda's journey was far from over. The wild would be as harsh as it had always been. But Koda had faced the hardest battle, the battle within himself. He had overcome the odds, the pain, and the fear. And now, he was free. For Emma and the team, the emotional impact of this moment was overwhelming. There were no words that could truly capture what they had just witnessed. They had saved Koda, but in many ways, Koda had saved himself. He had found the strength to fight back, to trust again, and to reclaim his place in the world. This was not just the end of Koda's story, it was a new beginning. As the last glimpse of Koda faded into the horizon, Emma whispered softly to herself, "You did it, Koda. You really did it." The weight of the journey, the challenges, and the sacrifices were all worth it. Koda had become more than just a rescued animal. He had become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of hope, and a reminder that, even in the darkest of times, there is always a chance for transformation. The journey of Koda's miraculous rescue had come to an end, but the impact of his story would resonate for years to come. It was a story of survival, of courage, and of the unwavering belief that every life, no matter how fragile, deserves a second chance. And with that, Koda was no longer just a polar bear. He was a living symbol of what it means to never give up, to keep fighting, and to always believe that a better tomorrow is possible. As the sun set on the vast Arctic wilderness, Koda's silhouette disappeared into the distance, his form growing smaller and smaller, until it was swallowed by the vastness of the world around him. It was the perfect end to an extraordinary journey, a journey filled with hope, struggle, and triumph. In that moment, Koda had not only returned to the wild, but had also rediscovered his place within it, a place he once knew, a place he now truly belonged. Emma and the rescue team watched in silence, knowing they had done everything they could for Koda. But the real victory wasn't just in his survival. It was in his transformation, the way he had gone from a vulnerable and broken creature to a symbol of strength and resilience. Koda's journey had shown them all the power of trust, patience, and the unwavering belief that every life, no matter how broken, deserves a chance to heal. Through his story, they learned that compassion and care can create miracles. It wasn't just the team's efforts that saved Koda, it was his will to fight, to trust again, to reclaim his place in the world. His recovery was not just physical, it was a testament to the power of resilience, of the bond between human and animal, and the quiet strength that exists within all living beings, waiting to be nurtured. Koda's story is a reminder that even when the odds seem insurmountable, there is always hope. His survival was not just a victory for him, but a victory for every life that has been overlooked, every soul that has been cast aside. It's a message that we all have the power to change the course of our lives, to overcome the challenges that stand in our way, and to rise above the hardships that test us. Just like Koda, we all have the ability to heal, to grow, and to find our strength again. As Koda now roams free in the wild, we are reminded of the importance of compassion, of lending a hand to those in need, and of the incredible difference we can make when we choose to act with love. And as Koda's story reaches its end, it's not just his transformation we celebrate, it's the hope and inspiration that his journey has sparked in all of us. If Koda's story touched your heart, we invite you to support the mission of animal rescue and protection. Every effort, big or small, makes a difference. Like, share, and subscribe to help spread this message of hope and love for all creatures, big and small. Together, we can make the world a better place for animals in need, just like Koda. Thank you for watching Koda's story, a story of survival, transformation, and the power of second chances.